October 1948. Dawn settles over Frankfurt like a thin veil of dust. The city is silent, except for the distant echo of footsteps on broken stone. Rows of collapsed buildings cast long shadows across streets where children once played. Smoke no longer rises from the factories. Their chimneys stand cold, like monuments to a world that burned itself out. On a street lined with shattered windows, a group of German officials gather outside a temporary administration building a former school. Its walls still scarred by shrapnel. Their faces are thin, hollowed by years of hunger and uncertainty. Across from them stand American officers, uniforms crisp against the gray ruins, carrying folders thick with papers stamped ERP, European Recovery Program. Inside, the air smells of damp plaster and fear. At a wooden table salvaged from the rubble, the two sides sit defeated Germany and victorious America, meeting not as enemies now, but as uneasy partners. The Americans slide forward documents promising aid, food shipments, machinery, raw materials, industrial support. No one in the room realizes it yet. But this quiet moment, buried in the ruins of a broken nation, is the spark that will ignite one of the most extraordinary economic transformations in modern history. In May 1945, Germany surrendered unconditionally, and with it came the collapse of an entire civilization. The Reich that once boasted of a 1,000-year destiny had lasted barely 12. What remained was a landscape so devastated that Allied observers compared it to the ruins of ancient cities ground down by centuries of erosion. Over 3.6 million homes were destroyed. Roughly 1/5 of the population was displaced. Entire industrial districts lay flattened by relentless bombing campaigns that had erased not just infrastructure, but identity. The German economy did not simply decline. It ceased to function. By 1946, industrial output had fallen to less than a third of its pre-war level. Coal, the lifeblood of factories, was scarce. Steel production was a shadow of its former capacity. Rail lines twisted across the countryside like broken veins. Even basic goods such as shoes, soap, and cooking oil became luxuries. Cigarettes replaced currency, and bartering became the only workable system for many families. Everything had a price, and none of it was stable. But hunger was the true enemy. Food shortages across all occupation zones pushed daily calorie rations to levels barely sufficient for survival. In the harsh winter of 1946–47, one of the coldest on record temperatures plunged. Coal piles vanished, and millions shivered through nights without heat. Parents scraped mold from bread. Children learned to live with the ache of emptiness in their stomachs. Mortality rose sharply, not from bullets now, but from cold and malnutrition. Politically, Germany was disassembled and supervised. The nation no longer existed as a unified state. Instead, it was divided into 4 occupation zones controlled by the United States, Britain, France, and the Soviet Union. Each zone imposed its own administrative rules, economic restrictions, and political visions. In the Eastern Zone, the Soviets dismantled factories and shipped machinery eastward as reparations. In the West, the Americans and British faced a dilemma: punish a defeated enemy or rehabilitate a crucial European territory. Amid this fractured landscape stood a population unsure of its future and fearful that revenge, not reconstruction, would guide Allied policy. Memories of the Treaty of Versailles haunted diplomats and civilians alike. Many Germans believed they were destined for decades of poverty and humiliation. Even among the Allies, there was disagreement. Should Germany remain weak to prevent another war? Or should it be rebuilt to stabilize Europe? By late 1947, The answer had not yet crystallized. But the pressures were undeniable. Europe was starving. Communism was advancing. And Germany, the continent's industrial engine, was frozen in ruins. The world was approaching a new conflict, not fought with weapons, but with ideology. It was in this fragile, volatile moment that America began shaping a strategy that would not only transform Germany, but redefine the balance of power for an entire generation. The path from broken empire to economic powerhouse was about to begin, quietly, through decisions made far from the rubble itself. By early 1947, the United States had reached a decisive realization. Europe could not recover unless Germany recovered. A continent stitched together by trade, coal, steel, and manufacturing could not function while its central industrial heart remained silent. And there was another rising concern. Soviet influence was expanding rapidly across Eastern Europe. Hunger, despair, and economic collapse created fertile ground for communist parties. And Washington feared that a broken Germany would become the next domino to fall. It was within this geopolitical tension that U.S. Secretary of State George C. Marshall delivered his now famous speech at Harvard in June 1947. He proposed a bold plan. The United States would provide massive economic assistance to help rebuild Europe. This became the European Recovery Program, better known as the Marshall Plan, one of the most ambitious foreign aid initiatives in history. Between 1948 and 1952, the U.S. would distribute over $13 billion in aid equivalent to more than $150 billion today. West Germany, despite initial Allied hesitation, became a major beneficiary. The U.S. sent food to prevent starvation, coal to restart industry, fertilizer for agriculture, and machinery to repair factories. But Marshall Plan funds alone were not the magic. They were fuel essential, but useless without an engine. That engine came from something else entirely: currency reform. Germany's old currency, the Reichsmark, was worthless, corrupted by wartime inflation and rampant black market trading. Prices were meaningless, savings were gone, productivity had no incentive. Factories could produce goods, but workers received nearly nothing in return. Economic paralysis was inevitable. To break this cycle, American and West German leaders enacted the currency reform of the 20th of June, 1948, replacing the Reichsmark with the Deutsche Mark, DM. The change was immediate and dramatic. Overnight, the black market collapsed. Shops that had been empty for years suddenly filled with goods because vendors finally trusted that money had value again. Productivity surged as workers received stable wages. The psychological impact was just as powerful. For the first time since the war's end, Germans felt that rebuilding their lives was possible. Behind these reforms stood the American military government, particularly OMUS, Office of Military Government, United States. Their economists, administrators, and advisors helped reshape production rules, decentralize monopolistic industries, modernize management structures, and dismantle remnants of Nazi economic control. They did not impose a system. They guided a framework that enabled West Germany's own innovators, policymakers, and workers to reignite their economy. America's strategy was rooted in long-term thinking. A prosperous West Germany would stabilize Europe, reduce the appeal of communism, and become a reliable ally in an emerging Cold War. It was not merely charity, it was strategic reconstruction. And as 1948 progressed, the effects of these combined efforts began to show. Factories reopened, railways repaired, coal output increased, the labor force mobilized, From the ruins, a pulse of economic life began to beat again. This was the moment historians later recognized as the turning of the tide, when Germany shifted from passive ruins to active recovery. The rebirth of West Germany's economy did not come from one policy or one shipment of aid. It emerged from the convergence of material support, structural reform, and the determination of ordinary people who had survived the war's darkest years. The first and perhaps strongest angle of this transformation was industrial revitalization, where American assistance acted as a catalyst for a broken manufacturing base that had once powered Europe. American aid did not simply provide food, it provided the tools for long-term recovery. Shipments of machinery, transport vehicles, spare parts, mining equipment, and industrial tools were delivered directly to West German factories. Many of these facilities had been damaged or stripped during the war, but enough foundations remained for rebuilding. Production of coal. Germany's primary energy source began rising again due to U.S. supplied machinery and training programs for mine supervisors. Without coal, there was no steel. Without steel, no construction, no vehicles, no factories, no exports. American advisors understood this chain, and they helped prioritize sectors that would spark the widest economic ripple effects. The Marshall Plan also revived transport. Damaged bridges were rebuilt with American engineering support. Railways repaired under Allied oversight began carrying materials across the country again. With transportation restored, German factories could operate at something close to pre-war rhythm. This industrial reawakening marked the start of measurable growth output numbers that would later shock global economists. But industry alone could not restore a nation. Germany's recovery was also built on human resilience. Beneath the macro-level reconstruction lay a quieter transformation: how American aid changed daily life. Food shipments from the U.S. alleviated famine, ensuring that workers had the strength to return to factories. School meal programs fed children who had spent years scavenging for scraps in ruins. Households received basic necessities: milk powder, canned meat, fuel, and clothing. For millions of civilians, these were not abstract statistics, they were survival. A generation that had known only rationing suddenly experienced stability. Parents no longer had to choose between feeding themselves or feeding their children. Laborers could work full days without collapsing from malnutrition. Confidence returned, and with it, productivity. This shift was not merely economic, it was psychological. The sense of hopelessness that had spread across post-war Germany began to fade. People saw that rebuilding was possible. Factories hiring workers again brought dignity back to families. Shops accepting the new Deutsche Mark gave people power over their lives once more. Across towns and cities, a new cultural rhythm emerged, one that looked forward instead of backward. Streets still bore scars of war, but they were filled now with bicycles carrying workers to jobs, merchants opening storefronts, children attending schools warmed by American coal deliveries. This rising energy in everyday life created the foundation upon which economic reforms could take hold. Recovery was no longer an abstract goal. It was visible in the streets and felt in the homes of ordinary Germans. And behind this social revival lay a crucial shift in policy and direction, one that would reshape Germany's political and economic identity. The early sparks of German recovery needed a guiding hand, and that guidance arrived through a combination of American-backed reforms, evolving markets, and the geopolitical realities of the Cold War. These forces worked together not by accident, but through a carefully shaped environment that pushed West Germany toward strength, stability, and unprecedented growth. If American aid was the fuel of recovery, economic reform was the ignition. In 1948, Under Allied oversight, West Germany introduced sweeping policy changes that would revolutionize its economic structure. Central to this transformation was Ludwig Erhard, Director of Economic Administration in the U.S. British occupation zone. While American officials oversaw currency reform, it was Erhard who made the bold decision to remove price controls, an act that shocked even some Allied administrators. Overnight, markets that had been frozen came alive. Goods long hoarded suddenly reappeared in shops because producers could now set prices that reflected real value. The black market, once the dominant economic force, collapsed almost instantly. This shift laid the foundation for the social market economy, a hybrid model balancing free market competition with social safety nets. It aligned perfectly with American objectives, a strong capitalist state resistant to the allure of Soviet communism. Under this system, businesses could innovate, workers could benefit from stability, and the government could protect citizens without stifling enterprise. The reforms were not simply economic, they reshaped national identity. A population once defined by state control first under the Nazis, then under occupation, began embracing responsibility, initiative, and the promise of individual prosperity. Another crucial pillar of recovery was access to international markets supported by American diplomacy. The United States not only sent goods into Germany, it helped Germany send goods out. West Germany was integrated into the OEEC Organization for European Economic Cooperation, a key structure for distributing Marshall Plan funds. Through this platform, German industries gained access to trade networks across Western Europe. American policymakers encouraged the reopening of export channels, understanding that long-term success depended on Germany selling its manufactured goods abroad. As trade restrictions eased, German products began appearing in markets they had been excluded from since the 1930s. Steel, machinery, chemicals, and consumer goods quietly returned to European circulation. Export revenue became a lifeline, strengthening West Germany's currency and giving industries the capital needed to modernize equipment. Markets rewarded the country's efficiency. Despite years of destruction, Germany retained a skilled workforce, advanced industrial knowledge, and a tradition of engineering excellence. America helped reconnect those strengths to the global economy. The most powerful, often understated angle was geopolitical. As tension grew between the Soviet Union and the West, Washington recognized that a weak Germany risked falling into the Soviet sphere. A strong West Germany, however, could anchor NATO, stabilize Europe, and serve as a symbol of capitalist success. American aid therefore took on a new urgency. Investments accelerated, political ties deepened. With the Berlin blockade of 1948–49, the U.S. became not only Germany's economic lifeline, but also its protector. This evolving relationship shifted public opinion. Suspicion faded into cooperation, and cooperation into partnership. West Germany was becoming more than a recipient of aid. It was becoming a strategic asset. By the early 1950s, these policy, trade, and geopolitical angles aligned, forming the backbone of what the world would soon call the Wirtschaftswunder, the German economic miracle. By 1949, the story of West Germany's recovery was no longer confined to administrative offices or factory floors. It had begun to appear in the raw data figures that startled economists, diplomats, and military planners across the Atlantic. A country that only a few years earlier lay in ruins was now accelerating with a momentum few believed possible. The first signs emerged in industrial output. Coal production, the backbone of the economy, climbed steadily as mines reopened and machinery restored by American assistance came online. Regions like the Ruhr, once synonymous with smoke and steel, began humming again. Rail cars rolled through newly repaired lines, carrying coal toward steel mills that had been silent since the war's end. By 1950, coal output had nearly doubled from 1,947 levels. Steel production followed. Factories that had once forged weapons now shifted to manufacturing civilian goods, construction beams, industrial tools, machine parts. Their revival was crucial because steel fed every other sector, from automobiles to housing. American engineers and German foremen worked side by side, modernizing equipment that the war had left outdated or damaged. The results were immediate. West German steel production surpassed pre-war levels far sooner than predicted, but the most decisive change came from exports. Within 2 years of currency reform, German factories were producing more than the domestic market could absorb. Manufacturers turned outward, reconnecting with European buyers who had always relied on German precision and reliability. Orders flowed in from Belgium, the Netherlands, France, Italy, and later Scandinavia. Goods stamped, "Made in Germany," a label once associated with militarism, were becoming a symbol of quality again. Economists began tracking the numbers with disbelief. Industrial output grew by more than 20% in a single year. Export revenues surged. Productivity increased as factories implemented management techniques learned from American training programs. By 1951, West Germany's economic growth rate outpaced nearly every other nation in Western Europe. Observers who had predicted decades of stagnation now revised their forecasts. The transformation was too substantial to ignore. American newspapers published stories describing a rising German phoenix, while British officials spoke cautiously of a remarkable economic revival. The Soviet Union, watching from the east, recognized the danger. A prosperous West Germany strengthened NATO's hand and weakened communist appeal. Inside Germany, the impact was tangible. Workers returned home with full wages. Families rebuilt homes brick by brick. Cities repaired streets, reopened schools, and restored electric grids. Consumer goods, radios, bicycles, sewing machines became common again. The sight of shop windows filled with products symbolized something deeper: the return of normal life. This upward surge formed the heart of the Wirtschaftswunder, the German economic miracle. What made it miraculous was not just the speed, but the improbability. Few nations had fallen so far, so fast, and risen so high, so quickly. American aid, currency reform, policy innovation, and geopolitical strategy were now converging into a single trajectory, lifting Germany from collapse into growth. The world had taken notice. But the turning point was not yet complete. A second surge, more powerful and more defining, was about to propel West Germany from recovery into global prominence. By the early 1952s, the question was no longer whether West Germany would recover, it was how far this recovery would go. What began as basic stabilization under American oversight had transformed into an unstoppable economic ascent. The world watched as a country once synonymous with destruction now emerged as one of Europe's most dynamic industrial forces. A key moment arrived in 1953, when the Allied High Commission lifted many remaining restrictions on West Germany's economic autonomy. For the first time since the war, German leaders could make independent decisions about trade, investment, and industrial planning. With sovereignty returning, confidence surged. Firms expanded operations, banks extended credit, and entrepreneurs launched new ventures. The automotive industry became the clearest symbol of this rise. Factories like Volkswagen, which had been nearly abandoned after the war, revived under British stewardship and later German management. The Volkswagen Beetle, simple, reliable, affordable, spread across Europe and beyond, becoming one of the world's best-selling cars. Its success was not merely commercial, it represented a psychological turning point. Germany was no longer a land of ruins, but a land of innovation. Consumer culture grew alongside industrial expansion. American influences filtered into everyday life. Advertising methods, management systems, productivity techniques, and even the aesthetics of new appliances and homes. Radios, washing machines, and refrigerators became common in households that, only a few years earlier, had struggled to find bread. The German middle class, once hollowed out by war and inflation, returned with strength. Yet behind the scenes, one force amplified all these developments: the geopolitical engine of the Cold War. As the United States consolidated alliances in Western Europe, West Germany became a strategic cornerstone. In 1955, it joined NATO. In the same year, the S supported the establishment of the Bundeswehr, West Germany's new army, signaling trust and shared interest. This alliance brought more than military cooperation, it brought investment. American firms opened branches in German cities. Joint ventures transferred technology, managerial expertise, and modern production techniques. West German companies, empowered by these partnerships, expanded their manufacturing output and penetrated global markets. Meanwhile, integration into European institutions accelerated growth. The formation of the European Coal and Steel Community in the early 1950s, and later the European Economic Community, EEC, gave West Germany seamless access to continental markets. American policymakers supported these organizations because they encouraged economic interdependence, stability, and Western unity. By the mid-1950s, the results were undeniable. West Germany's GDP climbed at record-breaking rates. Unemployment dropped to some of the lowest levels in Europe. The nation that had once struggled to feed itself now exported machinery, vehicles, chemicals, and electrical goods around the world. What made this transformation extraordinary was not just the metrics, it was the speed. In less than a decade, Germany had gone from rubble and ration cards to boardrooms filled with orders from every corner of the globe. And at the core of this ascent was the partnership forged between a defeated country and the superpower that chose reconstruction over punishment. The world had reached the pivotal moment. Germany was no longer merely recovering, it was rising. By the late 1950s, the effects of West Germany's transformation were impossible to overlook. A nation that had once stood at the center of global catastrophe was now reshaping the balance of power in Europe, not through force, but through productivity, diplomacy, and economic strength. The aftershocks of its recovery rippled across the continent, creating new winners, new competitors, and a striking contrast between two German states moving in opposite directions. In the West, prosperity surged at a pace historians still struggle to fully explain. West Germany's GDP growth consistently ranked among the highest in Europe. Living standards climbed as industrial wages rose, unemployment fell, and cities rebuilt with modern architecture and efficient infrastructure. The Deutsche Mark stabilized into one of the world's strongest currencies, admired for its discipline and credibility. Factories produced goods not just for Europe, but for markets as distant as Latin America and Asia. Meanwhile, East Germany told a different story. Under Soviet control, the German Democratic Republic adopted a centrally planned economy that often failed to meet citizen needs or global competition. Restrictions on trade, limited access to Western technology, and rigid state planning constrained growth. While East Germany achieved pockets of industrial strength, it could not match the dynamism of the West. The economic divide widened with each passing year, turning the inner German border into a visible line between two opposing worlds. For the United States, West Germany's rise was a strategic success. A stable ally now stood at the front line of the Cold War, economically capable and politically committed to Western security. American policymakers viewed the outcome as proof that reconstruction, not retribution, could transform the post-war order. NATO gained one of its strongest members, and Western Europe gained a reliable engine to drive integration and collective defense. For neighboring European countries, West Germany's resurgence was both a relief and a challenge. Its prosperity stabilized regional markets and strengthened early European institutions, but its rapid industrial expansion also revived old competitive anxieties. Still, cooperation won out. West Germany actively supported the emerging European communities, helping to build the alliances that would become the European Union. The map of Europe had changed not through conquest, but through recovery. As West Germany entered the 1962, its economic strength was undeniable, but so too was the debate surrounding how that strength had been achieved. Historians, politicians, and ordinary citizens all contributed to a growing conversation about the true cost and true meaning of American aid. The Marshall Plan and post-war reforms were celebrated by many as lifelines, yet others questioned whether dependence on the United States had shaped German policy more deeply than most realized. Critics argued that American influence came with expectations: political alignment with the West, participation in NATO, and a commitment to capitalist economic models. They pointed out that the U.S. had strategic motives containing the Soviet Union, building a network of allies, and preventing the economic mistakes that had followed World War I. These debates did not reject the benefits, but sought to understand the complexities of aid. Germany's prosperity, they argued, had been built through a combination of external support and internal discipline. Supporters countered that American assistance had given Germany the tools, but not the results. It was German workers, engineers, and policymakers who turned those tools into success. The currency reform would have meant nothing without the productivity that followed. The Marshall Plan would have been a short-lived donation without the innovation that German industries produced in the years after. For many Germans, the partnership with the United States was not a symbol of dependence. It was a bridge out of collapse. Public memory reflected this balance. The hunger years of 1945–47 remained vivid for those who lived through them, while the economic boom of the 1952 and 60 became a testament to what recovery could achieve. School lessons, public memorials, and political speeches all grappled with the dual identity of post-war Germany, a nation rebuilt with foreign help, yet defined by its own determination. In the long term, the consequences were profound. Germany emerged not only as Europe's largest economy, but as a champion of integration and cooperation. Its leadership in the European Economic Community, and later the European Union, stemmed from lessons learned during those fragile early years, that prosperity required collaboration, discipline, and a stable international order. The aftermath of American aid was therefore more than economic. It reshaped Germany's place in the world, forging a new identity from the ashes of war. In the quiet decades that followed the war, as the factories roared back to life and new skylines rose above rebuilt cities, a deeper truth emerged beneath the statistics. The story of Germany's post-war recovery was never simply a tale of money delivered or policies enacted. It was a lesson in how nations rebuild not through force, but through cooperation, restraint, and strategic vision. American aid did more than fill warehouses or revive production lines. It changed the trajectory of a nation that had reached the edge of collapse. The United States made a deliberate choice. Rather than punish a defeated Germany, it chose to stabilize it, believing that prosperity was a better safeguard for peace than vengeance. That decision reshaped not only Germany, but the architecture of the Western world. Yet the heart of the German economic miracle lay with the people who lived it. Workers who rebuilt shattered factories by hand, families who endured hunger, then embraced new opportunities with discipline and resilience. Students who studied in rebuilt classrooms, entrepreneurs who took risks, engineers who modernized production, leaders who dared to chart a new course away from extremism. By the time Germany became one of the world's leading exporters, the memory of rubble and ration cards had not disappeared. It had become the foundation upon which a new national identity was constructed. The partnership between America and Germany showed that even the most devastated societies can rise when stability is paired with responsibility, and when strategic interests align with human need. It demonstrated that the end of war is not merely the close of conflict, but the beginning of choices that determine what kind of world will follow.